Hello, my name's Jon Patrick and I'm responsible for Christie Co's leisure and development business around the UK. I'm delighted to be joined today by Ian Collier, Managing Director of Tingdene Group, a long-established family business that operate and develop in the holiday park, residential park and marina sectors. Ian, welcome. It's great that you can join us today, and we're really looking forward to you sharing some of your insights into the businesses that you operate within. Looking at trends across those sectors, we've recently published our Business Outlook 2025 guide. It's an interesting thing because we've published this now in Christie Co's 90th year. So we'd love to hear, Ian, some of your views in terms of major activity and any particular trends that you saw happening throughout 2024, as well as really, we're at the beginning of 2025 and how you think that might unfold.
2024, I think, was a sort of a challenging year for sort of all sectors that we operate in. We sort of noticed a bit of a downturn in the sort of the residential sort of sector and the sort of the holiday sector towards the back end of sort of 2023. Coming into 2024, we were sort of hopeful that that wouldn't continue and things would improve. The delay in the sort of the interest rate cuts not coming as early as we all anticipated, and then sort of the call of the election meant that there wasn't really any activity in those two sort of sectors until probably the August time. And then when that came, that was very short-lived because shortly after the election we had the announcement of the budget, and it just seemed everybody went into lockdown mode until the outcome of that. The marina sector, we operate sort of marinas, inland marinas, and the back end of 2023 and into 2024 was challenging. A lot of the rivers were on red boards, so boat owners and potential boat owners that were looking to acquire boats weren't able to use those boats, couldn't do trials on new boats or brokerage boats because the boards were in flood. So that delayed the marina sector and the boat sale market, the boat brokerage market. I think we got going just after Easter with the rivers coming off the red boards, and things did start to pick up a little bit. But I think it's fair to say across all three sectors, it all comes down to more affordable options. I think people were considering new boat sales, new caravan sales, new lodge sales, or even new park home sales. Literally all fell through the floor. So we seen that there's more of a drive towards second-hand boats, second-hand caravans and residential park homes as well.
I think another thing that we are conscious of in all of these sectors is that in a lot of instances they're family and generational businesses, and in a lot of those cases we're seeing people that sometimes have not got a succession plan because unlike in olden times, the kids have grown up, they've all gone to university, they've moved away from home, they haven't come back to the mothership. Are you finding that a particular trend that you see across the whole of the industry, that a lot of the sales are being driven by a lack of succession planning?
Oh, most definitely, yes. And I think we've been in this sector, in these sectors now for getting on for 25, 30 odd years, and historically certainly the residential more than the holiday and the inland marinas. So the inland marinas and the residential, I think, is almost still seen as a little bit of a cottage industry. Got to remember, there isn't that many residential parks out there in the marketplace. There isn't that many marinas across the whole of the UK in the grand scheme of things. And the majority of those sites or operations are all are generally single operators. Certainly on the residential side. For some reason, the kids of today don't see residential caravan parks and to some extent inland marinas as, I suppose, sexy, and therefore they're not interested in following in their parents' footsteps.
We're always saying to them, look, you need to prepare as much in advance of coming to market. It'll take as long preparing as it will actually the marketing process. So I don't know with, the businesses that you see, whether you see a lack of preparation of vendors, or ones that actually, get good advice, from their support, and they're actually coming to market with a really well thought out and defined strategy.
Well, we've built up relationships with a number of sort of, operators and those sort of family-owned businesses over the years. And then when it sort of, the opportunity comes and that time comes and they come to us and say, right, we're looking at sort of selling. We often find that it's probably a little bit of a knee-jerk reaction. Whilst that's good for us, from an acquisitions point of view, it can be very painful. And I could sort of list numerous sort of cases whereby we've sort of instructed lawyers and everything else, and sort of we've got the ball rolling, and it transpires several months down the line that they haven't even got some of the basics in place. It's so important to sort of get all your ducks lined up, and especially in this market where things are sort of taking too long as it is.
The government have been quite upfront about wanting to improve and increase the number of houses built across the UK to make planning more straightforward and timely. You would think that would be of benefit, from the residential part market, particularly when we've got rental values really high in residential. We've got some of the highest values in house prices.
Yeah, I would totally agree. I'm probably sort of a little bit sort of sceptical, having sort of the experience of sort of dealing with sort of the local planning officers. I've got a case on the go at the moment whereby we submitted an application sort of over 14 months ago for an extension to an existing residential park for 20 homes, and we ticked every single box. All the sort of environmental studies and everything else came good, and there's no reason why it shouldn't be green lighted. And we've almost sort of been told that, but not officially, by the planning officer. But here we are 14 months on, without a decision either way. I think there is that sort of, until park homes, residential caravans become more acceptable within the sort of the planning policy and everything else, it could potentially still sort of take some time for submissions to sort of, come good.
As far as the economic climate's concerned, Ian, we've had some real challenges to go through. I mean, that budget in October last year, what's been your sense of how, the holiday, residential park and marina sectors have dealt with this?
It's still very early days, especially with the sort of the increase in the employers' national insurance contributions and things like that. That's actually, and the increase in the minimum wage hasn't actually sort of kicked in yet. But I think we're all sort of starting to sort of try and look forward and sort of prepare for it. Certainly, sort of on the holiday parks where you've got sort of bar staff, waitressing staff. You've got quite a large headcount. And that's going to sort of have a big impact on the sort of the profitability of those sort of sites. I think across the sort of the talking to sort of friends and colleagues in the industry, it's almost probably going to sort of create a bit of a sort of a freeze on sort of employment, and we're already finding that there's sort of some people that I've sort of spoken to that maybe have sort of lost employees for various sort of different reasons, but they've sort of taken the view we're not replacing them. It was a budget that, as you say, we watched very closely, and we're still obviously sort of trying to sort of work our way forward to sort of unscramble it all.
Is the industry going to be capable of passing on the majority of costs to consumers, do you think, or will there have to be an element of absorption?
There's going to have to be an element of absorption, and I think we've sort of found that sort of certainly from the pandemic, holidays are more important to people nowadays than ever. We saw an increase in the number of holidays people were taking post-pandemic. That's slowly sort of come back down again. So rather than sort of people were sort of taking probably sort of 3 or 4 sort of short breaks a year, That's sort of dwindling down to sort of maybe sort of one decent break, or maybe sort of, you know, two or three sort of shorter breaks. And then the sort of, you know, we're finding as well that sort of those that are sort of taking those breaks are probably sort of using their sort of their holiday lodge or their caravan as more of a sort of a base, using that base to actually sort of, you know, to sort of dine and sort of socialise in. Whereas historically, sort of, you know, those places were almost sort of seen as a place to sort of put your head down at night, and the rest of the time was spent out on site in the sort of the local area, enjoying all the facilities and spending money in the sort of the bars and restaurants and that. And we're seeing those sort of numbers dwindling because people are sort of choosing to sort of stay in their sort of accommodation and sort of eat in to sort of, you know, sort of save costs.
There doesn't appear to be a lack of capital available in the industry looking, you know, there's a significant amount of wealth in owners, and a lot of those owners are long-term family businesses. So, you know, I think we'll still see quite an active purchasing market.
The private equity and the sort of, you know, venture capitalist sort of, you know, appetite as well in the, you know, for all sectors that we deal in. You know, that can only be a good sign for sort of, you know, sort of strengthening the sort of the appetite and you know, for the sectors.
We definitely saw a marked uptick from the second half of last year from private equity operators. I don't say beating a path to our door, but there were a lot of conversations taking place about, you know, potential opportunities in the market, and that's, you know, that's when you start looking at things that are of a scale. And I suppose we've seen it in the hotel industry where, and care homes too, you know, they evolve. It's, you know, operations of scale, bigger number of rooms, bigger number of lodges. So you get to that level where it's sort of, you know, 150, 200 units plus, and all of a sudden you're into a different buyer territory and you get, you know, opportunities 10, 15, 20, 50 parks. You know, the buyer group is considerably different.
The sectors are sort of quite small in terms of the sort of, you know, the number of sort of residential parks in the UK and the number of sort of, you know, inland marinas or number of marinas full stop. So, you know, there is tremendous opportunities for sort of, and the majority of those are sort of, you know, in single ownership. There's tremendous opportunities for sort of, you know, for people to come in and private equity, etc., and build up a nice sort of, you know, small portfolio or large portfolio of sites and really become a sort of a major player in the sector.
How are you finding the, you know, the banks, the financial community's interest in backing and supporting you into, you know, into new opportunities?
Very strong. So we deal with a number of different sort of banks just to keep them on the toes, and yeah, a tremendous appetite to sort of, you know, continue to do more, which is great for us. It allows us to continue, you know, growing and acquiring more and building for the future.
Another point I'd like to sort of cover, Ian, I mean, we're seeing, you know, the whole sustainability and green topics are in our living rooms every day of the week. How's the industry coping with that?
Yeah, I mean, that is, you know, a challenge for not only ourselves, but as you say, the industry. The majority of our sites are in sort of rural locations, and the ever-increasing sort of demand and put on us as sort of operators to sort of be able to sort of, you know, do the right thing and offer these green, you know, choices to our sort of, you know, consumers with EV charging points for cars and sort of solar panels, etc. You know, comes with you know, sort of challenges in terms of sort of, you know, is the infrastructure on the site up to being able to sort of, you know, allow for, you know, the car charging points. A lot of these sites have been around for sort of, you know, decades with, you know, very sort of archaic sort of infrastructure. You try sort of, you know, charging a sort of a car up on a sort of a site that was sort of developed in the sort of, you know, the 19 sort of, you know, 60s or 70s. it can be somewhat sort of, time consuming, because the sort of the draw on the sort of electricity and everything else is very small. So, we've found on a number of parks, we've had to upgrade our infrastructure, both, within the existing sort of park, where we've already got sufficient supply coming into the site. That can run into sort of several hundreds of thousands of pounds. And then on the flip side, we've got sort of sites where just the incoming supply to the sort of the site isn't up to sort of capacity. So we've then had to work with the local grid, with the national grid, and sort of, and get the sort of the supply up to into the site, sort of up to sort of, scratch, for us then to upgrade our infrastructure and just get in sort of an increased supply to sort of, the edge of your site, can cost many hundreds of thousands of pounds. So, it is a challenge. It's something that, we're sort of picking off site by site.
We've had some pretty horrific storm events already this year. We've seen on the news, a number of holiday parks that have been unfortunately underwater and people displaced. It's something like 20% of all holiday and residential parks are potentially at risk of flood events. So how is the industry capable of accommodating and looking at change?
With existing parks and existing developments, it's a case of sort of working with what you've got. And we've found sort of, over the sort of the past few years now, we've worked very closely with the likes of the Environment Agency, where we've got sites which are in sort of areas that are, could flood. So, you do all your risk assessments and you sort of put all your plans in place and everything else. And it's more about then sort of communicating that to the sort of the caravan owners and making sure they're aware of the sort of the risks and everything else. Sort of any new sites, that will all be part of the sort of the planning process and sort of building in areas of sort of at risk. A lot of sites in this sort of the industry, whether it be marina, whether it be a holiday park or a residential park, are born from the sort of, the sort of the caravan site era, which were historically, as we touched on early on, out in open countryside and probably along rivers and sort of in areas of, natural beauty, which, unfortunately are sort of prone to sort of flooding that we're experiencing today. It's something that we have to sort of work with. There's sort of technologies and that coming in to sort of be able to sort of, to lift caravans up out of the floodplain, etc. But obviously that all comes, at a cost and as an investment. And then on the sort of the flip side, we look at the sort of the inland marina sector, and like I touched on earlier on, we experienced sort of, 6 months on the River Thames where boaters couldn't use their boats because, the river was in floods. But yeah, it is having a sort of a big impact on sort of the on the businesses and the consumers' ability to enjoy their holiday home, their residential home, or the boat.
I mean, to the technological point, you mentioned about the platforms that are raising the homes out of the floodwaters, but you still can't physically get to your home. I don't know how will that work. Ultimately cars will have to be driven off site, but your accommodation at least is spared.
Yeah, that's it. It still means that sort of the accommodation can't be sort of used, and I suppose this is the sort of the where there is a clear distinction, in our sectors between the sort of that residential and sort of holiday. I think the sort of the idea of sort of somebody sort of occupying a holiday home, then they should have somewhere else to go to as their main residence, and the holiday home that could at times potentially be in flood, but they don't need to necessarily use it because they'll be tucked up at home. I think that's where things have probably got to just become a little bit sort of tighter in terms of sort of how these sites are used, and as long as they're used in accordance with how they've been designed to be used, it all comes down to sort of proper management. And like I said earlier on, it's then sort of working with the likes of the Environment Agency and the emergency services and everything else to make sure that you've got all the necessary sort of flood evacuation plans in place and everything else. That should that happen, then you have a site where you don't have any occupancy or anything like that, or anybody using the site during those times.
Do you have a sense at this early stage of the year, Ian, how you think 2025 is going to evolve?
I think in terms of the sort of the sale and acquisition of sort of parks, marinas, etc. Then yeah, I think it's going to be a very, very strong year. We've seen increasingly a number of sort of opportunities, sort of come to the market for probably various sort of reasons that we've already discussed. I think there's more activity from the private equity sort of sector as well, coming into the sort of the market as well. So yeah, I think sort of from the sort of the sale of parks and marinas, etc. I think there's going to be sort of lots of activity. Operational wise, it's still very early to sort of say, but I think sort of we've seen a sort of an uptake in sort of in inquiries on the residential side of things, which is encouraging. The only downside to sort of the residential sort of side is that we monitor the sort of the point of sort of the sort of registering the sort of inquiries and sort of deposits through to sort of completion, and that sort of normally sort of typically takes at least sort of 6 months, anything between 28 and sort of 32 weeks on average. Any business we're doing now, we're not really going to see the fruits and the sort of the benefits of that till probably sort of the sort of the summer. I mean, in terms of sort of operational wise on the sort of the holiday park side, and the marinas, and to a certain extent the residential, I think it's sort of it's carrying on from where we sort of saw sort of 2024 ending. It's more about sort of affordability. There's still that sort of drive towards sort of whether it be pre-owned homes, pre-owned lodges, and sort of pre-owned boats. So we see the interest and level of inquiries in that continuing to sort of rise. So it's all about adapting to the sort of the current market based on what we're sort of experiencing the sort of the first few weeks of 2025. I think sort of hopefully come the summer we'll see the sort of the benefits of all that, and we'll probably sort of allow the sort of the second half of the year to be sort of quite lucrative.
Well, it sounds like you got all bases covered this year. Ian, thanks ever so much for your time. It's been a pleasure, and we wish you and the Tingdene team all the best for 2025 and beyond.
Thank you very much.